The wind howled outside the small cabin on the edge of the snowy plains. Inside, the human man sat by the fire, sipping hot tea, wrapped in silence. His name was Yalan, a supply mechanic who lived alone after retiring from space work. He liked quiet places, far from the noise of big cities and alien politics. But that night, something broke the silence. Knock, knock. It was soft, almost like a whisper against the metal door. Yolan stood up, surprised. No one ever came here, especially not during a snowstorm. He walked to the door slowly, picking up his small blaster just in case. Another knock, weaker than the first. He opened the door, and his breath caught. There, standing in the falling snow, was an alien woman. Her skin was pale blue, her long black hair wet and frozen at the ends. Her eyes were wide with fear, but filled with something else too, desperation. She held something close to her chest, wrapped in torn fabric. Her knees shook, her feet bare in the snow, and then she spoke. Voice soft and shaking. Please. My child just needs one meal. Yalan blinked, unsure what to say. The woman's body tilted forward, and she collapsed right into his arms. He caught her in the bundle she was holding, feeling how light she was. The bundle made a tiny sound, a child's whimper. Without thinking, Yalan pulled her inside. He laid her down on the old couch near the fire and unwrapped the bundle. Inside was a small alien child, maybe 3 years old, thin and weak. The child's eyes barely opened, lips cracked, face pale. Yolan rushed to the kitchen, poured warm soup into a small bowl. He brought it over and helped the child sip it slowly. Carefully, the alien mother stirred, her eyes opening slightly. She looked at her child, then at Yalan. Her voice came out again, barely louder than a breath. Thank you. You didn't have to. Yalan didn't answer, just nodded. He brought her some soup too. But she pushed it toward the child. She hadn't eaten in who knows how long, but still chose to feed her child first. Minutes passed, and the room grew warm again. The child, after eating half the soup, curled up near the fire, asleep. Yalan sat across from the mother, who looked at him with tired eyes. What's your name? He asked. She paused before answering. Laura, she said, her voice still weak. I'm from Sector 3ness, but we ran a long way. Yalan raised an eyebrow. Ran from who? She looked toward the window, fear flashing in her eyes. The ones who kept us, she whispered. They said I wasn't fit to be a mother. They wanted to take him from me. Yalan leaned back, letting her words sink in. It wasn't the first time he'd heard something like this. Some alien species had brutal systems, especially with breeding experiments and labs. But this woman looked more like a lost mother than anything else. He got up, grabbed a blanket, and gently laid it over her. She flinched at first, but then relaxed. The fire cracked softly, filling the room with golden light. Later that night, Yalan checked on them again. The child was breathing softly, wrapped warm and safe. But something strange caught his eye, a soft glow coming from the child's chest, like a small light under his skin. Yalan blinked, wondering if it was just the firelight. But when he leaned closer, the glow faded. The mother suddenly opened her eyes, wide with panic. She sat up and pulled the child closer, shielding him. Please, she begged, don't make us leave. I'll explain everything, just not now. Her voice cracked, full of fear, not for herself but for her child. Yalan didn't know what to say. He had questions, yes, many of them. But he also saw something in her eyes, a look he'd seen in soldiers, refugees, and victims. A look that begged for safety, not pity. He sighed and nodded slowly. You can stay, he said, at least until the storm passes. Laura's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She lowered her head and whispered, thank you for seeing us. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside that small cabin, a flicker of hope began to grow, and Yalan had no idea that this night would change everything. Not just for the alien mother and child, but for himself too. Asterisk. The storm outside raged all night, but inside Jalen's cabin, there was warmth. The fire crackled softly, filling the room with orange light and calm. Lura slept curled up in a chair near the fire, her arms wrapped around her child. Yolan sat at the table, watching quietly, his thoughts heavy. Who were they really, and what were they running from? Why had that child's body glowed in the dark? He didn't sleep that night. He kept checking the window, making sure no one had followed them. The snow was deep, covering all tracks. Still, something in Jalen's gut said this wasn't over. Not yet. Just before dawn, the silence broke. A sharp, strange sound echoed through the room. Hurin. It wasn't a normal cry. Not like a baby or a sick child. It sounded deeper, raw, like a wounded animal or broken machine. Yolan stood up fast, his heart racing. The sound came again, louder. Lura woke immediately and held her child tighter. Her eyes darted toward Yolan, fear clear on her face. "What's happening to him?" he asked, stepping closer. Lura didn't answer right away. She opened the blanket slightly, revealing the child's small form. His skin shimmered softly with glowing veins of silver light. His eyes were closed, but he shook as if in pain. Yolan knelt beside them, unsure if he should touch the child or not. "Is he sick? Injured?" he asked again. Lura shook her head, her voice trembling. "No, this is normal for him. Or at least it was, back in the facility." "Facility?" Yolan asked, confused. She nodded, her eyes fixed on her son. "They called it a test site. My baby was made there, not born naturally. He doesn't cry like other children. His body reacts when he's scared or hungry. The light you saw last night, it shows when his energy drops too low." Yolan stared at the child again, who had started glowing brighter now. His small hands clenched and unclenched. The strange cry continued, but it was weaker now. "Is he in pain?" Lura looked down sadly. "Yes, but not because of illness. He's just empty." Yolan stood and hurried to the kitchen. He poured warm soup again, softer this time, and brought it back. Lura took the bowl and began to feed her son slowly, with each sip. The glow dimmed, the shaking lessened. His cries became soft whimpers, then stopped completely. Yolan exhaled. Finally able to relax a little, he watched as the boy drifted off into sleep again. Lura stroked her son's head gently and whispered something in a language Yolan didn't recognize. After a moment, she looked up. "You must think we're monsters," she said quietly. "But he's not dangerous, just different." Yolan shook his head. "I don't think that," he replied. "I've seen real monsters in the war, and he's not one of them." Lura smiled faintly, the first real smile he'd seen on her face. But then her expression turned serious again. "They're looking for him, you know," she said. "Even now, someone out there is hunting us." Yolan glanced toward the window. The snow was lighter now, and the sun had begun to rise. The shadows on the ground shifted, growing longer. "Who are they?" he asked. "Who exactly is after you?" Lura pulled the blanket tighter around her and her son. "A group called the Threx Corporation," she said. "They make weapons, biotech, and breed species for war. They created my son to be part of something powerful. But I wasn't supposed to survive childbirth." Jalen's eyes narrowed. "They tried to kill you." She nodded. "They saw me as just a tool, not a mother. When I held him in my arms, I knew I had to run." Yolan paced the floor slowly, processing everything. So this child wasn't just a victim. He was evidence, a living secret, and Lura, a fugitive in the eyes of the people who made her. "Why come here?" he asked, out of all places. She looked up at him, her voice soft again. "I didn't mean to. We kept running and running until my legs gave out. I didn't know who lived here, but the lights were on, and I prayed for someone kind." Yolan stood in silence for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "You found someone," he said, "and no one's taking you from here, not while I'm breathing." Lura's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. She just nodded. Holding her son closer, Yolan turned and checked his old hunting rifle hanging by the wall. It hadn't been used in years, but now, it might be needed. Outside, the snow began to melt, but in the far distance, a dark shape hovered above the mountains. Something fast, something searching. The peace wouldn't last, but Yalan was ready. Because that child didn't just need one meal anymore, he needed protection, and Yalan was willing to give it, even if it cost him everything. The morning air was colder than before. Yalan stepped outside his cabin. Scanning the horizon with sharp eyes, the snow crunched under his boots as he walked to the edge of the ridge. His old binoculars shook in his hands, not from fear, but from the weight of what he now carried. He wasn't just protecting strangers anymore, he was sheltering fugitives from a powerful alien group. Lura and her child were inside, still asleep, but above the mountains, he saw it dark and silent. A drone, shaped like a flying stingray, slowly circling the area. He whispered to himself, "They're coming." Yolan returned to the cabin fast, locked the door, and checked the weapons drawer. He only had one charged blaster, a dull hunting knife, and his old stun baton. Not much, but it would have to do. Inside, Lura was awake now, holding her child close. She saw his face and sat up quickly. "They found us?" she asked. Yalan nodded once. "A scout drone low-flying. About 2 kilometers east," he said. "You need to hide in the basement." She didn't argue. She grabbed a small bag of their things, wrapped her child in thicker cloth, and followed him to the trapdoor. He opened it, revealing the narrow space below the cabin. It was dusty, filled with old crates and tools, but safe. She climbed down without a word, holding the child tight, before closing the trapdoor. Yolan handed her a communicator. "If I don't come back in 2 hours," he said, "take the tunnel in the back and keep walking until you find the frozen river. Follow it north." She nodded, her eyes full of worry. "Don't let them take you either," she whispered. Yalan smiled a little. "I'm too stubborn for that." Then he shut the door and returned upstairs. He set up heat traps near the entrance, covered the windows, and turned off the lights. Now the cabin looked empty, cold, abandoned. He waited, heart steady, ears listening for the hum of the drone. Hours passed, then footsteps, not human, metallic, precise, moving in patterns. Yalan peered through a small crack in the window. There they were, 2 figures in black armor, faces hidden by smooth helmets. Each held pulse rifles and scanning devices. They moved like machines, efficient and silent. One of them raised a scanner toward the cabin. Yolan held his breath. The scanner blinked green no. Life signs detected. But then the second figure paused, kneeling down near the snow by the door. He pointed at a faint footprint. Lura's. The taller one gave a signal, and they both raised their weapons. They were going to enter. Yalan had no choice. He stepped forward and opened the door before they could break it. He raised his hands and stood in the doorway, blocking their view. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he asked calmly. The taller one spoke in a metallic voice. "We're conducting a sweep. A dangerous fugitive is loose in this sector." Yolan tilted his head. "Haven't seen anyone," he lied. "Just me in the cold." The soldier's helmet made a small clicking sound, probably recording. "Are you aware that aiding this fugitive is a criminal offense?" "No one's here but me," Yalan repeated. "You're welcome to check if you like." The two entered slowly. Scanning the room, Yalan stayed relaxed, casual, his hand never far from the blaster hidden near the stove. One soldier stepped toward the kitchen. The other moved toward the fireplace. The trapdoor to the basement was under the rug, and Yalan stood directly above it. Seconds felt like minutes. Then one of them turned sharply, raising his weapon. "There's a heat signature under the floor." Yalan moved fast. He slammed his elbow into the soldier's neck and grabbed the blaster by the stove. He fired, hitting the second one in the leg. Both soldiers stumbled, but Yalan didn't wait. He grabbed a flash grenade from the wall and tossed it. Boom! A bright light filled the room, stunning them both. Yalan pulled the rug back, opened the trapdoor, and shouted, "Go, now. Take the tunnel." Lura climbed up halfway, her face pale with fear. She held the child close and gave Yolan one last look. "Come with us," she begged. "I'll buy time," he said. "Now run." She hesitated, then turned and disappeared into the tunnel. Yolan slammed the door shut and locked it. The soldiers were recovering now, weapons up again. "You've made a mistake, human," one of them growled. "You don't know what that child is." Yolan pointed his blaster and replied, "I don't care what he is. He's someone's son." Then the room erupted in noise. Blasters fired, walls shook, sparks flew, but Yalan stood his ground, protecting the last hope that ran beneath his floor. Outside, the snow swallowed sound. Inside, a human faced shadows with nothing but courage, because kindness is louder than fear, and sometimes the greatest fight begins with just one meal. Asterisk, the tunnel under the cabin was dark and cold. Lura held her son tightly, her breath shaking as she moved through the narrow passage. Her feet splashed in shallow puddles of melting snow, and the old metal walls echoed with every step. Behind her, she could still hear the muffled sounds of blaster fire above. She wanted to turn back, but she couldn't, not with her child in her arms. Yalan stayed behind. Her heart ached, but she trusted him. No one had ever protected her like that, not since the day she escaped the lab. He had stood between her and death. Now she had to protect their future. After what felt like hours, she reached the end of the tunnel. A small hatch opened into a narrow valley covered in thick snow. The cold air hit her face like knives, but she didn't stop. She climbed out, hugged her child closer, and started walking toward the river. The boy hadn't said a word, but his eyes were wide open now, glowing softly with a pale silver light. She could feel something inside him, something growing. Energy pulsed under his skin, faint, but steady. As they walked, his head turned toward the sky. He stared upward with a strange, focused look. Lura followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Clouds, wind, and endless white. Suddenly, her son let out a soft hum. Not a cry, not a scream, but a deep vibration. She stopped, eyes wide. "What is it?" she asked gently. The boy raised a small hand and pointed behind them. Lura turned, and her heart nearly stopped. A drone hovered above the trees behind them, silent, black, its red eye glowing. It had found them. Lura ran, snow crunching under her feet as she slid down the slope toward the river. But the drone moved faster, scanning, tracking, ready to fire. She fell to her knees and shielded her son with her body. "No, please," she cried. And then, silence. No shots, no heat, no pain. She turned her head. Slowly, the drone was frozen in place, hanging midair, trembling. A light was coming from behind her. She turned around and gasped. Her child stood now, no longer afraid. His eyes glowed brighter, and his hands were stretched toward the drone. Silver energy flowed from his fingers like smoke, wrapping around the machine. With a sudden jolt, the drone cracked and dropped from the sky like a stone. It hit the snow with a dull thud. Sparks flying. The boy blinked, took a deep breath and collapsed. Lura rushed forward, lifting him gently into her arms. He was breathing, just exhausted. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "It's okay, I've got you." Tears filled her eyes. This was the power they feared. This was why the lab had locked her away. They had made her child into a weapon. But they didn't realize he had a soul, a heart, and a will of his own. She started walking again, this time faster. She had to get to the frozen river, just as Yalan said. With her son's power awakening, every tracker and hunter would soon come. An hour later, she reached the river, frozen solid. The wind blew hard here. But she spotted an old shed nearby, half buried in snow. She carried her son inside, set him down on a pile of rags. and started a small fire with scraps she found. It wasn't much, but it was something. The boy slept quietly, his chest rising and falling slowly. She watched him closely, wondering what he truly was now. Not just her son, not just a survivor, but something more. Outside, she heard distant engines, more hunters, more drones, coming closer. Her time was running out. Suddenly, her wrist communicator buzzed. It was Jalen's voice, broken but alive. "Lure, if you're hearing this, I'm okay. They took me, but not far. Some outpost. They don't know about the tunnel. Get to Sector Ridgepoint 12. I'll find you there." Then the signal cut. Lura sat in silence, the fire crackling beside her. She looked at her son, then at the stars outside the broken window. They had taken Yalan, but he was still alive, and he had risked everything for them. She stood, wrapped her son in cloth again, and stepped outside into the storm once more. She wasn't going to run anymore, not now, not with the power awakening inside her child, and the promise of hope waiting ahead, because Yalan didn't just protect them, he believed in them, and belief was a kind of power too. Lua wrapped her child in every piece of cloth she had left. His skin was cold, but his pulse was strong. He hadn't spoken yet, but his eyes were open now, following the light. The broken shed gave them shelter for a while, but it wouldn't last. The sound of engines echoed faintly through the mountains closer, with every hour. She looked at her wrist communicator again. Jalen's last message repeated in her mind. Ridgepoint 12. I'll find you there. Lura didn't know how far that was, but she knew one thing: she would walk, crawl, or bleed if she had to. She would get her son to safety. She would get them both to him. She tied strips of cloth around her feet, then strapped the child to her chest. The cold bit her skin like needles, but she didn't stop. Step by step, she moved through the frozen woods. The snow was thick, but she found a rhythm, following the pale blue trees that glowed faintly under the clouds. Hours passed, maybe more. She had no sense of time, only movement. Her legs ached, her fingers burned. Still, she kept walking, whispering softly to her child, "We're almost there. He's waiting. You're safe." Behind her, high in the trees, something moved. A scout drone, black and sleek, scanned the forest below. It followed her trail, silent and deadly, but it wasn't alone. Further back, 3 armored figures marched through the snow. Threx hunters built for capture, not mercy. They had her scent, and they would not stop. To them, Lura and her son were not people, they were property. But Lura didn't know how close they were. She just walked forward, toward a promise, toward hope, until her legs gave out and she fell into the snow. Her body shook from cold and exhaustion. The child whimpered softly against her chest. She couldn't move anymore. Tears froze on her cheeks. Then, something warm, a soft hum. She opened her eyes and saw a faint silver glow. Her son's hand had slipped free from the wrap and was resting on the snow, where his fingers touched the ice. The ground melted. Warmth spread around them in a perfect circle. Lura stared, shocked, as the glow grew brighter. The child's breath was calm, now focused, steady. She whispered in awe, "You're saving us again." The heat from the child gave her enough strength to move. She pulled herself up, carried him once more, and kept going. Every few meters, he would glow and melt the snow under them, giving her another step, another breath. It was slow, but they were moving again. Then she saw I-10 old watchtower in the distance, built into the rocks. It must be from the early mining days, long abandoned. She climbed the last hill, her body screaming for rest. Inside the tower, it was quiet and dark, but the walls were strong, and the cold stayed outside. She laid her son down and finally let herself collapse beside him. The journey had drained her completely, but she had made it. Ridgepoint 12 had to be nearby. Suddenly, the silence broke, a sharp worry sound close. Inside the building, Lura's eyes snapped open. She wasn't alone. A tall figure stood in the shadow, slim, armored, holding a stun baton. The red lights on the helmet glowed, and the voice that followed was cold. "You've led us far enough," the hunter said. "Stand down." Mother Laura pushed herself in front of her child, shielding him. "No," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "You can't have him." The hunter stepped forward. "You can't fight us." Laura looked down at her son. He was awake now, eyes glowing again. The silver light returned, but this time it didn't just hum. It pulsed. The hunter froze as the air thickened. Static. Sparks floated around the room. Then boom, a blast of invisible energy erupted from the child. The hunter was thrown back into the wall, dropping the baton. The lights flickered, and silence returned. Laura crawled to her son, who was still glowing, but breathing heavy. She hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're more than they ever imagined," she whispered. "And I'm more than they ever feared." Moments later, a new sound came from outside. Footsteps, softer this time. The door opened slowly, and there stood Yalen, dirty, bruised, but alive. He stared at her, then at the child glowing in her arms. Then he smiled. "I told you I'd find you," he said. Laura rushed into his arms, the child between them, for the first time. All three were together, not running, not hiding, just holding on. The journey had been hard, the danger still real, but they had found each other again, and that meant they could face anything. Yolan stood by the broken doorway of the tower, his arms tight around Laura and the child. His face was cut, his clothes burned, but he was alive. Laura didn't ask how he escaped. She just held on to him like she would never let go again. For a while, the three sat together in silence. Snow fell outside, wind howled through the cracks. But in that small corner of the cold world, there was warmth again. Later, when the child slept peacefully, Yalen finally spoke. "We can't stay here long," he said. "More will come, stronger ones." Laura nodded, brushing hair from her son's face. "Where can we go?" she asked. "There's no one left I trust." Yalen was quiet for a moment. Then he said something she didn't expect. "I know someone." His name was Marikan, old friend from Jalen's war days. He lived in an abandoned mining shelter deep in the cliffs, a place no drone could fly, no signal could reach. Marek had once saved Jalen's life. "Years ago, if there's anyone who can help us disappear," Yalen said, "it's him." They packed quickly. Yalen gave Laura a small weapon, just in case. Then, carrying the child together, they left the tower behind. It was a hard climb. The cliffs were steep, and the snow was thick, but after hours of walking, they reached a tall rock wall with a narrow entrance. Inside was a tunnel lit by soft blue lights. At the end stood a figure tall, broad, with short gray hair and tired eyes. "Yalen," the man said, smiling faintly. "I thought you were dead." Yalen laughed. "Almost," he replied, "but I brought company." Marek's eyes landed on Laura and the child. His smile faded a little, replaced by curiosity and something else. "You trust them?" he asked. "With my life," Yalen said firmly. Marek stepped aside and let them in. The shelter was warm. Old tech hummed quietly, and supplies were stacked against the walls. For the first time in days, Laura let herself breathe fully. That night, while the child slept, Marek pulled Yalen aside. They stood near a broken console, speaking in hushed voices. Laura watched from a distance, noticing how serious their faces looked. She couldn't hear the words, but something felt wrong. Later, when Yalen returned, he sat beside her and smiled. "He says we can stay a few nights," he said. "After that, we move south. Marek knows a smuggler who can get us off-world." Laura nodded slowly, but her eyes stayed on the door. Something in her heart whispered danger. She didn't sleep that night, and she was right. The next morning, she woke to the sound of boots, heavy, fast, echoing through the metal hallways. Yolan was gone, and Marek was standing by the child, holding a shock baton. "Step back," he ordered. Laura jumped up, eyes wide. "What are you doing?" she cried. Marek's face was cold. "You think you're the first runaways to come through here," he said. "You think I survived this long by helping everyone?" Lura's hands shook. Yolan trusts you. Marek snorted. Jay, fool. Always has been. He brought a weapon into my home. That child is worth more than a ship full of gold. She stepped in front of her son, arms wide. You'll have to go through me. Marek raised the baton, but before he could strike, a voice boomed from behind him. Put it down, Marek. It was Yolan Blaster drawn, face full of rage. I should have known you'd sell us out. Marek didn't move. You don't understand, Yolan, he said slowly. They're going to come either way, at least this way. We get out. Alive. Yolan stepped closer, his hand steady. You had a choice, he said, and you chose betrayal. For a moment, everything was silent. Then Marek dropped the baton, stepped back, and sighed. Fine, he said. Go. Take them. And go. But don't ever come back. Yolan didn't reply. He just walked to Lura and the child, helped them gather their things, and led them out, back into the cold, back into the unknown. As they walked, Lura looked up at him. You didn't have to stop him, she whispered. Yolan looked down. His voice rough. Yes, I did, because this time, I won't let anyone hurt you. She looked at him longer than before, not just with gratitude, but with something warmer, deeper, maybe trust, maybe more. The snow fell again, quiet and soft, but now, they weren't running because they were weak. They were running because they had hope, and hope was stronger than betrayal. The sun rose slowly behind the snowy mountains. Soft pink and orange light spilled across the frozen trees. Lura, Yolan, and the child stood at the edge of the cliff, breathing in the cold morning air. They had walked through the night, leaving behind betrayal, fear, and danger, and now, they were free, but still without a place to call home. Yolan looked ahead at the old signal tower in the distance. It was broken, abandoned long ago, but its tall steel walls still stood. He turned to Lura and gave a small smile. We fix it, he said simply. We make it ours. Lura stared at the tower with tired eyes. Her body ached. Her mind was still spinning from everything that happened. But something inside her whispered yes. Not because it was perfect, but because it was quiet, and it was far. The child, now resting in her arms, blinked at the rising sun. A soft silver glow pulsed under his skin again. Not from fear, not from pain, but from peace. They crossed the last stretch of ice and climbed inside the structure. It was dusty, full of broken machines, spider webs, and old crates. But the walls were strong. The roof didn't leak, and the door locked tight. To them, that was enough. Yolan got to work right away. He fixed the heater first, using pieces from his old pack. Then the lights, dim but warm, flickered on. He found an old solar battery on the roof and set it up again. By nightfall, the tower had light, warmth, and even hot water. Lura cleaned the inside. Clearing space for a bed, she used old blankets to make a soft nest for the child. She even found a tiny, stuffed toy in a crate, probably left behind by some worker years ago. She gave it to her son, and for the first time, he smiled. Not a glow, not a hum, just a simple, innocent smile. Lura gasped softly, touched his cheek, and kissed his forehead. You're safe, she whispered. You're finally safe. Days passed, and life returned slowly. They planted seeds near the back wall, melted snow for water. Yolan taught Lura how to use some of the human tools. She showed him how to understand the strange humming sounds the child made. They learned from each other, grew together. Each night, they sat by the heater, the child curled up between them, the stars blinking through the tower windows. Sometimes, they didn't speak at all, just listened to the silence. A silence that didn't carry fear anymore, only peace. One night, Lura turned to Yolan, her eyes soft, voice quiet. I never thought I'd find someone like you, she said. Not after everything I've seen. Yolan looked at her, surprised. You mean someone who gives soup and gets shot at the next day? He joked. She laughed, really laughed, and nodded. Yes, she said. Exactly that kind of someone. Yolan reached out, gently touching her hand. "I'm glad you knocked on my door," he whispered. Lura squeezed his hand softly, her eyes misty but smiling. The next morning, the child did something new. He stood up on his own, walked to the door, and pressed his glowing hand against it. The metal shimmered where he touched it, like it remembered his energy. The door locked tighter with a low hum, his first act of protection. Lura watched in awe. Yolan laughed softly and said, "Looks like we've got a guard now." The boy turned and ran into Lura's arms, giggling for the first time. She held him close, her heart full. Later that day, they carved something into the wall by the entrance. Just a few words in a mix of human and alien script. "This is our home." It wasn't perfect. The shadows of the past still whispered from time to time. But together, they had made something real. A place built not on steel and stone, but on trust, kindness, and sacrifice. One night, as snow fell softly outside, Lura looked at Yolan and asked, "Do you think they'll ever find us again?" Yolan paused, looked at her, then at the child sleeping between them. "Maybe," he said, "but this time, we're not running." And she believed him, because now, they weren't just survivors. They were a family, and this world, forgotten and far away, had become something sacred. A home, not just for a mother and her child, but for a human who gave everything to give them a chance. And the child who would grow up never knowing the cage he was made for. Only the warmth of the man who called him son, and the love of the woman who never stopped fighting for him. Outside, the stars turned slowly in the sky, and in the heart of the frozen land, their new life quietly began.